Welcome to Ithaca Politics, a series of shows that looks at the political life of Ithaca, New York. In this episode, we have two candidates who are running unopposed. Jorge Defendini for the 4th Ward seat and Ducson Nguyen for the 2nd Ward. Going back to this special meeting of Common Council on October 11th that ratified the MOU between Cornell and the city of Ithaca. Jorge, you characterized Cynthia Brock's amendment to hold firm for a better timeline and increased payment as selling a fiction and hurtful and disingenuous. With a little retrospect, do you still consider those characterizations as accurate?
I think so, yes. As many folks know, I was one of the biggest advocates for getting as much financial investment into our community by Cornell University. And I tried to push out and hold out for as long as we could. But the fact of the matter is that the city's budget was held hostage by Cornell University, and it's easy to strong arm in negotiations when you have all of the cards, as Cornell does, given that they have a tax-exempt status in New York State. The fact of the matter is that Cornell had us right where they wanted us, and they knew that we couldn't really push any farther. Otherwise, we'd risk either implementing austerity and slashing our budget, which I completely reject as a principle, or radically increasing the tax rate for the city of Ithaca, which would have hurt the most vulnerable members of our community, tenants, low-income workers, the most. And so, yeah, I really do believe that what was sold there was a fiction. It wasn't a possible reality. If it was, I would have been fighting for it, but it just wasn't in the cards.
So it appeared that Cynthia was really trying to rally more the grassroots movement and just say, as her words were, let's put a stop to this. Mm-hmm. And you feel that's disingenuous in some way?
Yeah, I mean, there was a lot of organizing that went into it prior to September 11th. And a lot of organizing that I was a part of and that other members of council, such as Alderperson Kumar, were a part of. We both attended a rally at Cornell, trying to push the MOU vote, which we ultimately wound up succeeding in doing. And we were able to really change the parameters of the deal. And I mean, frankly, I'm still disappointed with this deal. I think it is too small a dollar amount and too long a timeline. And I'm going to be pushing, every waking moment to get a stronger and greater investment from Cornell into the Ithaca community. But right before we are entering the budget process, after we have just ratified labor negotiation contracts and have a lot of initiatives that we want to pursue, the 11th hour is not the time to pull out a new version of the MOU.
You did mention that you're going to be working every waking hour. Any plan so far?
Yeah, I mean, I think we have to really connect with the grassroots organizations that helped get us to the point of making the deal better than it actually was when we first started, and talk about how we can put more social pressure on Cornell. There are a lot of avenues in which they invest in the community right now. TCAT is one of them. We're dealing with severe problems with TCAT, and we also have the Ithaca School District. So there are a lot of avenues of pressure and need that the city needs, that Cornell can play a much larger part of. And then, of course, we need to be in coordination with our state legislators, State Senator Webb, Assemblymember Kellis, and really start connecting with legislators downstate who have to deal with Columbia, NYU as big universities that also enjoy this tax-exempt status. That coordinated effort and local organizing is what we need for the city.
Mm-hmm. Well, Ducson, during that meeting, you appeared to be a little less impassioned about taking the fight to New York State. Are you going to jump on that train if it gets rolling?
Oh yeah, if I came off that way, it wasn't intentional. I think that is the best path, is to follow the paths of other states that tax endowments and find other creative ways to chip away at the tax-exempt status. It is more productive. To Jorge's point, I think pursuing state and federal legislation is a more productive path than appealing to Cornell's better angels. I think we've kind of maximized that route. And to agree with Jorge, to push it further would have, I think, inevitably resulted in Cornell rejecting the deal and not coming back. And so we got the so-called gag clause taken out of the MOU, which gives us the freedom. Frankly, it was unenforceable, but it is on paper taken out of the MOU so that we can lobby for changes at the state and federal level.
Okay, let's turn to development. You are both in wards that's seen a lot of development over the last few years. Starting with you, Ducson, you've been quoted as a huge supporter of the Sterry project on Green Street. And, few would argue with the benefits of low-income housing, but I'm also wondering about what services can be provided to folks in a much higher density as downtown may be. I mean, for example, people are still going to probably be driving to the Miracle Mile to do their shopping. So I'm kind of wondering if we're looking at greater density, but not really planning for, let's say, how transportation is going to work for these folks in light of our commitments to decarbonization. Would you care to comment on that?
Yeah, I agree with you. The services are just as important as the housing itself. They're kind of dependent on each other. So to the extent that a Green Star Oasis, which is where I do a lot of shopping, survives, kind of depends on there being a population that's there willing to shop there. You bring up transportation, Jorge mentioned TCAT earlier. It's really important that we staff that back up and restore service to its pre-pandemic levels. We've had some, just like every other industry, we've had issues recruiting drivers. We also recently at TCAT negotiated a new contract. It's been a year, but with higher pay to hopefully attract more drivers and more mechanics. So public transit is a huge part of it. Car share, bike share. I think we are partnering with a number of organizations that provide alternatives to cars, to owning a car. So even when you do need a car, car share, which thankfully our state assembly member and state senator got the insurance rules changed such that car share can begin operating. But the 6-month gap is still very painful, including for myself. We're a one-car household, and my wife takes the car to work, and sometimes I need a car to run some errand, and I don't have that option right now. So I think we do actually have a decent number of alternatives to driving. They, as always, need further development and then further investment. And then as for the actual services themselves, I think there are a few pieces to encouraging more businesses downtown to choose to operate. One is bringing the people. 2 is safety. And then 3 is kind of encouraging landlords to be good citizens. And so we spoke about state legislation earlier. The city of Ithaca can't impose its own taxes. It's not enabled to in New York State. We have to go to the legislature if we want to institute, say, a vacancy tax, which is something that a lot of people have talked about in recent years. Not every landlord is, I'm not a commercial landlord, so I don't understand the incentives involved, but it's very clear that a number of landlords, including some very infamous ones, hold out for very specific tenants. And in the meantime, we're left with these empty storefronts, which kind of hurt the vitality of downtown and deprive it of these services that you mentioned.
The conference center was pretty controversial when it first started, and I think it's slated to open in 2024. Are you aware of any contracts, people that are signed up to be using the conference center, organizations?
No signups yet, but during the budget process, we got an update on the interest, and apparently the interest is high. I think there are a few reasons. Ithaca is beautiful, is gorgeous, obviously with a vibrant, progressive community. But on top of that, the conference center is the first in the nation with an all-electric kitchen. And organizations that want to align themselves with sustainability goals will want to highlight the fact that they're holding a conference in one of the most sustainable places available in the country.
Mm-hmm. Any thought about perhaps more sustainable wages, since it's really appealing to the hospitality industry, largely the conference center, in terms of encouraging, greater wages among those people are supposedly going to be affected by the larger population of people coming downtown and spending money on hotels and restaurants and that sort of thing. I know that was initially brought up when it first started, but I haven't heard much about that recently.
Yeah, I don't think much hiring has happened yet, but that's certainly, I fully agree with you. I think it's not only the right thing to do for the reasons you stated, but frankly, to go back to the labor issue, it's the best way to attract people to that work.
Okay, so Jorge, looking at College Avenue,
Yeah.
have you been satisfied with the planning process that allows all the building right there in the heart of College Town? I mean, is there a concern for neighborhood preservation? And really, the high rents that seem to be about the highest in all of Ithaca, working somewhat against, I believe, your position about reasonable rents and affordability.
Absolutely.
So I'm kind of wondering how you reconcile the two things.
Well, it's really easy for me to reconcile that because the development that I promote and want to encourage is development based off of need. And so what we should be working and developing is affordable housing. I'm a big advocate for the Home Together Tompkins plan, which is to secure more permanent supportive housing units to help folks who are dealing with chronic homelessness and have lower incomes than the rest of us. And so I'm not supportive of these big development plans that are just building more market rate housing. I'm not a believer in this theory that we've been sold of if we just build a whole lot of market rate or luxury housing, that will drive the neighboring rents from smaller or medium-sized landlords down.
But it's happening right in the middle of your ward. Yeah. I mean, have you spoke up in opposition to it?
Absolutely. I've been a critic of it, and I'm going to continue to be a critic of it. I think we should be doing away with these tax abatements for these development projects. I've spoken against a couple of them during my time on Common Council, and will continue to speak against them. And if we are going to have them, we have to make sure that these projects, as they currently are being built with organized labor, and that they pay prevailing wages and whatnot. And so my focus is, if we're going to have development, which I'm a supporter of, it needs to be on the basis of need, not just what can maximize the most profit. And that's a big issue in College Town, and one that I'm going to continue speaking out against.
Okay. Speaking of tax abatements, I believe you are a representative to the IDA?
That's right.
So there has been talk about really cutting back on the tax abatements, particularly for market and luxury housing. Where do you stand on that?
Well, to be frank, I probably have an unpopular position here. So I've seen a lot of projects, not a lot, there are a handful of projects. The ones that don't get the abatement don't get built. The margins are super slim, and it's very expensive and difficult to build in Ithaca. Now, that said, the abatement program now has a 20% affordable housing requirement, or a contribution to the Community Housing Development Fund. It does have a local labor requirement, and these additions have happened in the past few years by my predecessors in the IDA, thankfully. And so it makes it a way better program, more justifiable, I think. Ideally, I don't like the race to the bottom with regard to tax abatements on stadiums and other commercial projects. But there is a need for housing at all levels. I think even there's value in the market rate housing, in that, for example, if more students can live in College Town and can afford to do so, they are freeing up homes in Fall Creek for potential conversion back to single-family homes, which has happened. My house, actually, on Cascadillo, used to be a multi-unit, and someone before me converted it back to a single-family. So that gives more homeownership options, just more options in general. So I think it's a tool to be used like any other tool that we have in our basket. I don't unilaterally support it in all dimensions, nor do I oppose it. Notably, though, I think it's a worthwhile conversation, because notably the projects in College Town do not get tax abated. The ones that are in the density zone downtown, in the flats, where we identified a need for increased activity. So I think it's a valid concern that, where do we draw the line, make that adjustment? Maybe it's time to increase that affordable housing component.
Do you have any thoughts then about Ducson's position?
Yeah, I mean, I think Ducson brings up a lot of good points. The thing that comes to my mind when it comes to the projects, particularly in College Town, I'm a recent graduate of Cornell University, and when I was there, when I finally moved off of college campus, we were in College Town, and I had to, bunk up with a lot of my friends so that we could all come together and find a larger apartment with rent that we could afford. Because those big buildings on student agencies, that have rent that's going for as high as like $2,000 a month, I couldn't afford it. Nobody I knew could afford it. So there were definitely two different Cornells. Definitely on campus. And I think a big issue that we need to talk about, I saw, to Cornell's credit, a rare sentence from me, to Cornell's credit, they have made some more developments on their campus for student living. And I think that's really important because this idea that Cornell will offer housing for first years and then you're on your own as an upperclassman puts the burden on us on a city where now we need to secure more housing that's not low income and affordable, and that leads to College Town getting larger and larger, which I think has an inverse impact on the greater housing market. It's driving our rent up.
Let's switch a little bit to transportation. We mentioned this in terms of downtown planning. I don't know the full name of the commission, but I call it the Transportation Commission that you serve on, Ducson.
Unfortunately, it hasn't met since before the pandemic.
No kidding, really.
Yeah, none of our commissions, except for the Sustainability Commission, the new one that we just created, has met recently, which I think is it's been a huge detriment to the city at large and to Common Council. So the roles of the advisory commissions was to do research for us and help us on things that we didn't have the bandwidth to do. So, for example, the Mobility and Transportation Commission has done research on scooters, so they came up with a pretty reasonable scooter legalization plan when Lime considered bringing them here. That is now a moot because we don't have them, but they also did extensive work on snow removal, municipal snow removal on sidewalks. Eric Lerner, the former chair, did enormous work on that on the commission, and then later in private life, currently is a huge advocate for it and continues to fight for that. So, to me, it's a huge loss. I think I know staff has a lot going on, but we've talked for over a year now about restarting the commissions, and I'm disappointed that we haven't begun the broader recruitment process to get people on. And again, the commissions don't operate without staff support. And so I understand it's a difficult time, and the clerk's office in particular has seen a major retirement, and so I need to staff up and get back to it. But so I'm empathetic, but at the same time, I would love that to be a priority in the next year, is to restart the commissions.
Well, we're going to talk about that actually if we have time. Basically, the Board of Public Works has come under the spotlight for the suggestion of doing away with BPW. But I guess my point was, you're an avid cyclist and on the Transportation Council. I'd like to know, where the heck are the protected bike lanes in Ithaca? I mean, that's the gold standard in terms of getting people out on the streets safely cycling.
Well, it's a challenge for us to convince both our constituents, visitors to the city, and our own staff that it's the right thing to do. So we don't dictate policy in those terms. There are some instances in which we can, but we also are respectful of the expertise of our staff, and even though sometimes there are disagreements. And so it is both a political battle. So the bike lanes, as they are, just paint on Cayuga Street, were enormously controversial. This happened before I joined council, but I remember the outrage that one side of the street was losing parking. Later, when I was on council, the West State Street Bridge got a road diet, which means that they reduced the number of lanes to make room for a wider sidewalk and to add a bike lane. That became an enormous thing, where dozens of people, mostly commuters, and so not city residents, not our constituents, but nonetheless, they came to council and were outraged by the potential traffic implications. We had several people who threatened to sue the city for, honestly, I'm not sure on what basis. I welcomed
All
the lawsuit.
the communities throughout the country and now in the world that have moved much more progressively towards providing this, because obviously they're concerned with the global effects of continued transportation.
Exactly.
And they've worked through these community issues.
That's right. And then, sometimes we've had some disagreements with staff over, say, bike parking. So a few years ago, early in my term, Bike Walk Tompkins collaborated with some city employees to install on-street bike parking, and then that was removed by edict of Public Works. So, it's a constant education and political battle to well, not just educate, but to really convince people that it's the right thing to do for health and sustainability and equity reasons. So that road diet benefited the residents of West Hill quite a bit because they had many of them walk or bike into downtown, and making it safer for them. And frankly, it's become a minimal impact to commuters. I'm there a lot because I'm at the gym, and I see the morning commute, and I've heard from commuters it's a little slower maybe, but absolutely worth the safety benefits in my opinion. And so I think these experiments like that really help to convince people as well. But I'm with you. Protected bike lanes are the way, and I'm glad to see that at least a portion of the Route 79 East State Street bike lane leading up to Mitchell is protected, but only a portion.
Oh, it is? I didn't realize
There's
that.
a small concrete curb on the initial climb on the hill.
Okay, so there is a little bit of progress in
We're getting there.
Ithaca, New York. All right. There are a few other transportation things that maybe we'll get to, but we are kind of running out of time, unfortunately. Let's get to what's been an ongoing hot topic is the sanctioned camping in the green zone. So there's been quite a bit of blowback from first responders that essentially this process of sanctioning encampments are sanctioning criminal activity in the jungle. So I guess I wonder how both of you respond to this criticism.
I could start that,
Sure,
and I'll
please.
say that, we're hearing from a couple of our first responders that, this is an issue. I totally empathize that. We want to make sure that people are completely safe when they're doing their job. Safety for everyone involved, the first responders, the people who are engaging with them, absolutely. The fact of the matter is that we know that punitive measures like camping bans and enforcement of them, they just don't work. The data proves it. They're more expensive to pursue in terms of policies. And if you look at places where they exist and are intensely enforced, like New York City and San Francisco, they haven't put a dent in homelessness. So they just don't work. We know what the solution is to homelessness. It's not a secret. And the answer isn't to cart people away and make sure that they're staying out of specific areas. It's to provide them with housing and to make sure that they can stay in that housing with social services. This is why I'm a big advocate for permanent supportive housing. It's not, in my opinion, just the moral thing to do. It's the scientific and data-proven thing to do. And that's why I'm a big supporter of the Home Together Tompkins plan, and that's why we need to really focus on striking a balance between short-term and long-term solutions. Short-term in creating an attractive site for the green zone that we want people to go to, and that we can encourage them and incentivize them to go to. And that, I think, is going to weed out a lot of the folks who are really struggling with these issues and folks who might be using the jungle as a front for criminal activity. I don't believe that this punitive enforcement will work, because if you're a criminal who's already breaking the law, what's one more law to break in terms of violating a camping ban? And the fact of the matter is that those punitive measures also make it difficult to establish trust between government officials or social service providers who are trying to get people to a better position. So we need to do a lot more carrot and a lot less stick, which is my approach to this.
I fully agree with all that, but I also add that for the goal of the sanctioned encampment too is to actually provide better access to the emergency responders, is to build roads and just make it more easily accessible, so that when things happen, the sanctioned encampment does not mean that we are sanctioning all the terrible things that we've heard happen there to many of the residents who are in the encampment. So we want safety for them too, as Jorge said.
Yeah.
And so, to be clear, even though we're not enforcing a camping ban, it's still illegal to assault someone, and so we fully expect IPD to respond to those cases and to when other first responders don't feel safe entering to accompany them. So I think that and to and we're going to adjust things too. You know, we're all learning during this process, and it's hugely complicated. And Jorge just mentioned cities with enormous resources, at least compared to us, have been unable to solve this problem. It would be a great bit of hubris on our part to assume that we have all the answers. But to the extent that we do have answers, I agree with Jorge. Like the approach that we're trying to take should yield better results, I think.
I believe one of the committees, PEDC, is working on the issue of what happens with people that are outside of the green zone and still want to camp. Is there any forward movement on a policy of how that may be taken care of, enforced?
We haven't discussed it yet, but yeah, that's something we'll be discussing soon. We're going to take. So, the one thing missing too from why we decided to go with the carrot approach first before we entertained any enforcement mechanisms is that we didn't feel like we had a multi-agency, multi-municipality communication and approach. And so the mayor has wisely convened or called for the convening of a county, city, a nonprofit working group to work on this together. And so between staff and them and other stakeholders, I feel like whatever we come up with going forward will make more sense for the community.
Yeah, absolutely.
Let's go back to this issue of the commissions being somewhat inactive, the advisory boards. And as I mentioned, the Board of Public Works was the most visible. And apparently the city came out and said, no, we really don't feel we need this oversight board. Things have been working pretty well as they have been. I guess I'm wondering, are we looking at a trend where you say the other commissions haven't been meeting, that the concentration of power is going to be happening now more with the city administration and perhaps less with oversight by council, particularly with the city administrator coming in and the authority resting with that city administrator? So I'm wondering, is this a concern at all? Concentration of authority.
I mean, I wouldn't phrase it that way, but it is a concern of mine. And I would say this: the city did not come out and say that BPW wasn't necessary. I would say the superintendent of public works has expressed his belief that staff and council can take care of things, and there are others in city government. But we haven't actually discussed it on the floor as an issue, and there are pros and cons. I think I'm largely a supporter of keeping it going for the reasons you state. That it's not just a body for public input, but for city output in terms of reaching out to stakeholders for any given public works project. So again, there are pros and cons, but we haven't actually, as a council, really talked about it, let alone given a up or down vote. And then it's in the charter, and so if we were to do away with it, it would need the public's input anyway in the form of a vote.
So we're almost out of time. Would you like to make a comment then about
Yeah,
this?
absolutely. I mean, I think I agree with a lot of what Ducson had said. I am a big advocate for the commissions and the boards. I think they should come back. I think they're a great practice in civic engagement. I think they make the democracy that we have here, both nationally and here locally, a lot healthier. And so I'm going to be advocating that they come back, because I think, the other thing that we haven't mentioned is that we're part-time city council, and so there isn't enough time in the day to do everything, and our staff are overworked, and so we got to really come together as a small city and make it work together.
Well, you both have the dubious distinction of being named in a lawsuit by the former police chief. I guess he is accusing the city of racism in that he wasn't appointed on a permanent basis. Mm-hmm. Can you take us back to this time? What was really going on with the city in terms of the issue around appointment of a permanent police chief? Ducson, you want to start?
Sure. I think ultimately for me and for the majority of council, possibly all of us, he just wasn't the right person, given what we've discussed as the future direction of the Ithaca Police Department with respect to our goals and for reimagining public safety and just the community-focused policing that we want. He was not the right person. It's the mayor's job and duty to put forward a candidate and for us to vet it up or down. And And it was very clear, even before any vote, that he did not have council's support. And so I'm going to prefer to focus on the future. We have a new search out with a consultant who will hopefully find us some excellent candidates. The department does need leadership. There's a lot going on right now. We do have some public safety challenges. We are hopefully, with all these settled new contracts, going to refill their ranks. But that does require a strong leader who matches the community's values. And so I'm choosing to look forward and hopeful that we will find, and I'm confident that we will find a good candidate.
Okay, but I do believe this was a pretty divisive issue, and I think it's sort of wrapped into a lot of the divisiveness around reimagining public safety and the ethics issues and how the police have responded overall. Do you feel like we're beyond that, or are we still enmeshed?
On the issue of the chief,
Yeah.
I don't think it was a divisive stance or issue. I think council was near unanimous in believing that we needed a different candidate for a police chief, and I think that was reflected in the fact that his endorsement by the mayor was pulled right before it came to a vote by council. But on the issue of reimagining public safety, that is an issue that has been divisive, and I think there's been a lot of misinformation and frankly a lot of propaganda around what the implications of these policies are. I think these were in some instances, very modest and common sense reforms that were essential, that we need to be uptaking, and they were painted as, full on, not just abolition, but just reckless abandonment of how things operate. That wasn't the case at all. And I think that misinformation that was coming from a lot of sources, including the PBA, has created an environment that I think has played a big factor into why we've had challenges in recruiting new officers. And I think there's a big national issue, of course, in trying to recruit more officers across the country. But I don't think that misinformation and propaganda that was going around helped at all. In fact, it poured kerosene on the issue.
Sounds like you're sort of dismissive then of the police issues around restructuring through reimagining.
I mean, issues and complaints and concerns I totally understand and sympathize with, but the outright labeling of things as like disasters or huge errors or mistakes, and some of the rhetoric that we were hearing, it was counterproductive. Like, I wasn't a part of the reimagining public safety process. I was right before my time. But I know that those were tough conversations to have. And community members, law enforcement, people who usually do not participate in the political process, played a role in that. And I think everything, including the ethics investigation and whatnot, had played a role in really making it harder to move forward with this stuff. And so if we want to work through and try and come to a common solution, I'll meet with anybody to talk about that. But just preventing progress from moving forward for the sake of trying to hold on to the status quo, I'm not going to be in favor of.
So I was on multiple reimagining public safety working groups, and I agree with Jorge. There was a lot of hyperbole that was unwarranted. And ultimately, we pursued common sense things that other cities did. We're a little hyperbolic ourselves, calling it reimagining public safety, but it stemmed out of the governor's at the time edict to all municipalities to do so. And so I'm still proud of us for taking it more seriously than any other municipality that I'm aware of. Basically, when Cuomo left office, I feel like every other municipality just dropped it, and we have stuck with it. And we're not going to get it, again, to an earlier point, we're not going to get it right immediately. We're going to have to evolve it, but we're committed.
Well, Ithaca has been a sanctuary city, and I know you've initiated sanctuary status. But I'm also wondering, a number of upstate counties have put out emergency decrees saying nobody that is a asylum seeker is to be allowed in. How is Ithaca going to approach this issue, if it ever happens, where a number of asylum seekers, people that are undocumented, show up by the busload? Do you feel like we are going to take that same position of, hey, not here? Or can we possibly embrace folks with all the issues that go with it in terms of housing and that?
I mean, as speaking for myself, I will personally be pushing for the latter as opposed to the former. I think I'm very proud of Ithaca's status as a sanctuary city, and I think it's a great testament, and especially given some of Ithaca's involvement in larger, geopolitical events throughout in the country's history. I'm thinking of Ithaca Gun Hill's involvement in supplying arms to groups like the Contras or to the Argentine, military government that was, very regressive and a brutal dictatorship. That's just a crumb of the fact that the United States plays a huge role with its foreign policy in bringing and creating these migrant crises and whatnot. And so the bare minimum, the floor, is to deal with those consequences and take in as many people as we can. Now, I understand that, you can't, have the floodgates open and just take in more than you can handle if you want to do a good job. But let's have a conversation of talking about how many can we take in and support, not even have the conversation of, well, do we? Do we have a moral obligation to do so? You do.
I fully agree. I'm the child of refugees fleeing a war, and I think people far smarter and familiar with this work than I am. Ithaca Welcomes Refugees, Catholic Charities, a host of other organizations in town, I think can mobilize us. I don't know exactly how we would absorb a large influx, but I'm fully supportive of doing our best. And I find those edicts from our neighboring counties to be frankly disgusting, and I would never support such a thing.
In the last PEDC meeting, the Economic Development Committee sort of outlined a plan, South Side, and that the South Side portion of the plan you described as lacking imagination. And I wonder if you wanted to elaborate a little bit more on that.
So in the development of the South Side plan, we had regular meetings with all kinds of stakeholders, including residents. And to be frank, a lot of them held misgivings about urban living that I find to be the most vibrant parts of it. So, for example, I live in the same block as an extremely popular coffee shop. And I love it. It's an asset to me and to the entire neighborhood and the community at large. And it was very specifically called out by some residents that they don't want coffee shops near them because it brings traffic or too much noise. And that's just one example. But I embrace multiple uses for buildings, and to have, we talked earlier about having services for residents in the form of places to buy groceries or get whatever it is that they need. And they're not evenly distributed throughout the city. The flats are small, so it's not a big deal to walk downtown, but nonetheless, I can say with personal testament that having a coffee shop or other amenities right by you is a blessing. And so I would prefer to focus on the benefits that such amenities can bring rather than the fears of instantly going to the negatives of noise and traffic. And if those things happen, like we have other mechanisms, we have noise ordinances, we have a host of solutions to reduce car usage. And so, I would love my neighbors and constituents to embrace new ideas and be open to what's possible. And I'll note too that when we don't update zoning to reflect, so the plan was complete, but then we didn't actually enact the zoning, the actual change in the law to reflect it. And so what happens there is you end up with a car wash in the South Side neighborhood where there could have been housing or other amenities that don't promote a car-first culture. And so there are huge costs to leaving things the status quo without re-examining them.
So it sounds like, despite the more progressive reputation of Ithaca, there's a certain conservatism about change.
100%, and there are multiple motivating factors. People are perhaps rightfully concerned about the value of their investment in their homes, or they just want peace and quiet. I get all that. I will add, however, that we live in a city. Cities change or they fall away. And so we are lucky to be vibrant compared to some of our upstate neighbors. And our job, both on council but also as a community at large, is to guide that growth in a way that benefits its residents.
Okay, well, that's pretty much all I have. Either you have any additional comments that you would like to make about your candidacies, possibly?
Well, not much about my candidacy. Following up on, I think, Ducson's point, with my perspective, I come from Queens, New York City. And I remember one of the biggest culture shocks when I got here, even living in like college town, was that, all right, it is now 9:30 and everything is closed. Luckily, I'm in college town, so I can find the 24-hour 7-Eleven that's just a little bit more up the hill. But it's a big, it's a big culture shock. And this one of the benefits of living in a city is that there are so many amenities, and it's beautiful to walk outside. And there are so many opportunities for social engagement and collective living. A lot of folks, I think, to Ducson's point regarding this sort of little bit of conservatism that we have in Ithaca. A lot of times people kind of want to be in their castle, like on an island by themselves, and then engage with society, on their terms. And you can't always do that if you're living collectively with people. And we live collectively with people for a reason, so that we don't have to be experts in everything and have everything, on our responsibility. So I'm a big advocate for a lot of what he's talking about, and would love to have a couple more coffee shops, even in college town.
I also wonder if it's perhaps the pace of development that's happened over the last 10 years that people living in neighborhoods are feeling a little insecure about the change that's been happening, and so they're likely to feel a little bit more holding on to their own, and suspicious of change that people are suggesting.
I'm sympathetic to that. I mean, even I'm a huge advocate of development and building more housing, but even I feel some construction fatigue, and I'm waiting for a specific block of KU Street sidewalk to finally open after being closed for 5 years. So I feel it, and that's why it's important to get everyone's voices so we can grow in a responsible way.